In today's card tutorial, I will be creating 3 cards and showing you how to color your texture paste, and I will have a little help along the way. This is Mindy Eggen, and welcome back to my channel. I'm going to start with the thick brush stencil from Gina Designs, and I'm going to apply some Pixie spray from ThermoWeb. This is just a really low-tack adhesive to make sure that my stencil stays in place on my cardstock, and when I remove it, it is removed easily and does not rip my paper. So once I sprayed that and let the stencil sit for just a second, I went ahead and attached that to the front of my card. I am using the edible eggplant cardstock from Gina Designs. This is the container of the Pastillage texture paste. You can see it is a larger container than what you may normally see. And I'm going to start off by taking my palette knife and just scooping some of that texture paste onto my craft sheet that I am working on. Then I'll bring in my reinkers. I'll start with red velvet and add a couple drops. I like to kind of shake it up a little bit, and then I'll come in and add a couple drops of the Dandelion. Now there are a couple things I would suggest keeping in mind when you are adding any liquid to your texture paste is it will thin it out. So you don't want to add too much or it's going to be almost watery and could seep under your stencil. So to mix those, I'm just going back and forth to really mix that color up, kind of scraping it with the side of my palette knife, and you can see it did kind of thin that out a little bit and is a little drippy, so you just want to be careful when you're adding that reinker. And then taking the side of my palette knife, I'm scooping that color up and spreading that down, starting from the top and spreading it down my stencil. Now I'm not being overly careful at this point. I just wanted to get a good part of that texture paste onto the cardstock. And then I'll come back over and I'm going to do the same thing with the Dandelion. And you can see that is a really bright and it lightened up a lot, that color. When you add your reinker to the texture paste, it will change that color a little bit. You can see the red velvet is almost kind of a corally pink. So to help deepen my yellow a little bit, I did bring in a drop of the Tangerine reinker. And I'm just mixing that up, going from side to side with my palette knife. So I'm really scraping that around on my craft mat. Then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just kind of scoop some up and going from the bottom. And this really turned into such a gorgeous color. I was playing around on Pinterest with some color palettes. I actually typed in fall color palettes and there were a lot of different options there. I seen some deep purples and actually I was hoping this red would be a little closer to red, but it still came out just gorgeous. It's kind of one of those things you just experiment with, and I was really happy with the results. So once I had that yellow on there, I just took my palette knife, scraped all the way down to get the excess off, and then I'm just using a baby wipe to clean my palette knife and my craft mat. So now I'm just doing the peel and reveal. So I'm carefully lifting up that stencil and just check out how amazing those colors look on that edible eggplant. So I'm just going to set that off on the side to dry for a little while. The next background that we are going to create is actually featuring a special guest on my channel. This is my daughter who is going into 8th grade, loves arts and crafts like her mom, and she thought this looked like a lot of fun while I was filming the first background. So she is going to be making the second one here. She is actually using Cranberry Tart cardstock with the Water Droplets stencil. So she has 2 piles there because we're just going to mix 2 colors here. She started with the Dandelion, dropped some ink into the paste, and then she's mixing that up from side to side, scraping that with the side of her palette knife. And then she's starting at the top and dragging that down to cover all the areas from the top half. She'll be doing kind of an ombre effect here. And this was another one where we had just did a search on Pinterest. Now you could look for summer palettes or fall palettes, just some different color combination, and we thought this one was really striking. Now, if you are looking to clean up your craft sheet or your palette knives, we did this with just a baby wipe to wipe it up and then dry it with a paper towel. For the stencils, once we were done, we took them over to the sink and just ran them under some warm water. You could rub your hand over them to really help move that texture paste off. Now for her second pile of the texture paste here, she added in some red velvet and then a little bit of tangerine because we already knew that adding red velvet was not going to give us red. So she added just a drop of the tangerine, and like I said, you want to be careful how much liquid you're actually adding to this so it doesn't get too drippy. You don't want it to seep under. Even though we did spray this with the texture paste, anything that's going to get just a little too watery, you are risking it going underneath and getting in areas you don't want it to. So she just went to the other side of her cardstock and she is spreading that down, meeting into the middle. And she'll just go back and forth to mix those two colors up. Once she's done, she is taking the stencil pal from Thermoweb. Starting at the top, she's just going to drag that down her entire cardstock. That's going to give a really nice even coat all the way down that cardstock piece. So once that's done, she'll do the peel and reveal, and this came out amazing. These colors are so beautiful on that Cranberry Tart cardstock. Now one more background we have here. This one is a watercolor background I did. I just had used a couple different pinks of watercolor for an ombre effect. And if you don't have any reinkers, you can color your texture paste with ink pads. So I had taken the Dusty Rose ink pad from Gina K Designs, just squished that down on my craft mat, and then adding some of the texture paste. And I'm going to mix this into that ink that I had smooshed down. So another great option to do some different colors. And I'm just kind of smushing that back and forth, dragging that with the side of my knife. That really scrapes up any of the texture paste. So I kind of like to keep mine into one pile on my craft mat. Now I'm going to use the Rose Swirl stencil that I had already sprayed with some of the Pixie spray, and I'm going to spread this mixture all the way down the entire front of the card. Now you certainly could leave this just as is. It will dry with a matte finish, so it's not shiny. It has a really nice matte finish. Depending how much you add onto your cardstock will vary the drying time. I gave these about 30 minutes, and then I was able to touch them without smearing. I could cut the cardstock, so I would give it at least a good 30 minutes depending how heavy your texture paste is. And then just removing that, and this is going to have a really nice soft light pink background to that, which I think looks beautiful on the pink watercolor background. So off camera, I did go ahead and attach these into cards. This is the first one, which is using the edible eggplant cardstock base. I did a sentiment that was just stamped on white cardstock in the obsidian ink, and I used the sentiment from the Elegant Aster stamp set. It is a gorgeous, beautiful, large stamp set, and I thought that sentiment just worked really well with it. This is the card that my daughter Allison had created. So we had trimmed that down and added it to a white piece of cardstock measuring 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. We did hugs and kisses, and the hugs comes from the Hugs stamp set. It is a mini set, so it has the word hugs and then a couple other small sentiments so you can customize, and there's also a coordinating die that you can purchase, which is what I had done. Next up, I'm using the Wishes stamp set, which is another mini stamp set. I die cut the word 3 times out of white cardstock and layered it with the Connect glue and just added that small birthday sentiment on there. Now this was only a couple of ways that you could use the texture paste. I hope you did enjoy them. I will have all of the supplies listed down below in the video description, and over on my blog I will also be giving more detail about the cards, including measurements if you are interested. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so and would like to see more videos from me. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.